Hello, everyone. I'm Josie. This is my colleague. And yeah, thank you for joining us today. As you know, climate change is very real, and the best way forward towards a more sustainable future begins with education, which is why we're super thrilled to host a live stream today with, I have to say this correctly, aquatic ecologist Lena Fellinger, who will be talking about why we need to protect the ocean and how.
Many thanks, and welcome everybody to today's workshop on sustainability and plastic reduction. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself before we dive into the topics that interest us today. My name is Lena Fellinger. I hold a master's degree from the University of Vienna in Austria, and I'm specialized in aquatic ecology, the area in which I now do my doctorate studies. Which sounds fancy, and basically it means that I'm an ecologist who is working with and in water. I started out focusing more on the marine world, which is why I spent a few months in Croatia in 2018 teaching school kids about the Mediterranean Sea and environmental issues. Then I slowly changed to a more freshwater-based work, but in many aspects the same principles apply, as we'll hear later. I've been doing science communication and environmental education on and off for about 4 years already. Last year, I did a certified course from UNESCO MAIO-XD about protected area management with a special focus on the Mediterranean Sea and plastic pollution, and the topic of single-use plastics. Now, for the next 2 years, I'm participating in a European project focusing on microplastics. Not only from a professional, but also from the personal side, sustainability and eco-consciousness are topics very close to my heart, which is why I'm delighted to be presenting here today. Thank you to waterdrop for asking me. And if you have any questions throughout the talk, please do note them in the chat or keep notes so we can talk later about them in the Q&A session. Now, let's think for a moment. Can you imagine how life would look like without plastic, like entirely without plastic? It's pretty hard, isn't it? Now, let's have a poll. Who can imagine a life completely without plastic, and who can't? The thing is, we are surrounded by plastic. There's plastic bottles, plastic straws, plastic packaging and wrapping, plastic bags, plastic toothbrushes, plastic gloves, even plastic toys. This is not a complete list. There are many more items that are made of plastic or contain plastic, and we use those items a lot. Sometimes we might even think that it wouldn't be possible without plastic. Plastic is a necessity, and those items cannot be made from anything else. Sometimes we can agree that plastic items are necessary, like in laboratory or hospital settings. We all probably don't want to imagine a doctor or nurse taking care of our wounds entirely without gloves. Not too long ago, this was a given throughout the world. Sometimes plastic is maybe not as necessary, like when wrapping fruit that can be washed or even peeled, like banana. If nature already invented its own wrapping, why do we have to add one? And why do we have to add one out of plastic? So, time for our next poll. How much plastic do you think is being produced worldwide per year? 3,700 tons, 370,000 tons, 37 million tons, or 370 million tons? Worldwide, in 2020, 370 million tons of plastic have been produced. I have changed my slides, as you can see here. I wanted to talk about the Eiffel Tower, and then I changed it to talking about the elephant. Well, we will talk about the elephant, so forget the picture of the Eiffel Tower. An African elephant grows to around 7 tons. So that means that around 53 million elephants of plastic were produced in 2020 of plastic. Now, I know this is still kind of abstract, but many of us have seen elephants, at least in the zoo. So I think we can agree that it's a lot of plastic that is being produced every year. What is really important to keep in mind now that I show these country numbers, and when we talk later about plastic waste especially, this is not a blame game. Some countries sell their plastic waste out to other countries, so essentially the waste problem is being exported, and then in some of those countries it ends up polluting the environment. And just because the problem is not in front of our doorsteps anymore, it doesn't mean that in essence it's not still our problem. We live in a globalized world. We are all connected, whether we like it or not. There are no problems like plastic waste that are just a European problem, or just a Chinese problem, or just a USA problem. And quite frankly, looking at the numbers, we all cannot afford to point fingers at anyone else. If you think about this, Germany alone is producing 1/3 of Europe's plastic. It's 14 million tons per year, so that's 2 million elephants. But the plastic that's being produced in Germany doesn't only stay in Germany, so it's not just a German problem. Now, when we come to the topic of plastic waste, the main problem with plastic is it doesn't just disappear. If you throw some apple peel on the compost, it will degrade and eventually disappear. If you do that with banana peel, it's more problematic, but mostly also because the bananas we buy in the store have been treated chemically. Well, if you throw away plastic wrapping, it will not degrade for hundreds of years, and it will not disappear entirely at all. If you throw it in a garbage can, it is of course out of sight, but the problem remains. The amounts of plastic waste we produce are shocking. That's 40 million tons of plastic waste in the USA in 2021 alone, around 6.5 million tons of plastic waste in Germany, and 2 million tons of plastic waste in Spain. And in the other countries, it doesn't look very different. Now, looking at per head numbers, so how much waste one person on the average produces, in the USA, that's 130 kilograms per head per year of plastic waste. In South Korea, it's 88 kilograms per head per year. In Germany, it's around 78 kilograms. There are a lot of different numbers out there because it always depends on the definition of plastic waste that is being used. If we look only at wrapping materials, of course, we end up with different numbers than if we include everything that is plastic in a household. So always be careful when reading such statistics, always look closely at what exactly they were looking at, not only what they write in the headlines. Our next poll, what do you think? How many years ago did plastic become popular and used a lot? 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, or 75 years ago? Looking at the history of plastic, it becomes even more shocking. Basically, only since the 50s, plastic production really took off. In 1950, only 1.5 million tons of plastic were produced worldwide. Now we are at almost 400 million tons per year, just to remind you. 56%, so more than the half of all the plastic ever produced, was produced since 2000. This means over half of all plastic ever produced was produced in less than 25 years. Until 2015, a mind-boggling number of 8.3 billion tons of plastic waste were produced. This is roughly the number of the people on the planet right now. We are at around 8 billion, and just as many tons of plastic waste were produced not even in 100 years. I would like to tell you now that the trend is already downwards, that we are producing less, but we are not. How did this whole circus even start? Why start with plastic if it's so harmful for the environment? Well, the beginning was fairly innocent. In the late 19th century, advances were made to create formable plastics from organic substances such as cellulose, the stuff that makes up the bigger part of plant cells. In 1884, the first half-synthetic material was invented, known as viscose. This was still derived from cellulose. In 1907, bakelite was invented. This is now already entirely artificial, which means that it has molecules that are not to be found in nature. From then on, the artificial reign began. In only a few years, cellophane, synthetic caoutchouc, PVC, and polystyrene were produced for the first time. And in 1930, one of the major players of our plastic world was produced, polyethylene, commonly known as PET. Why was plastic such a hype? Well, it was considered cheap, modern, clean, and trendy. More expensive materials such as ivory could be replaced, for example, in brushes, and production for the growing human population became possible without committing financial suicide. So plastic is not just plastic. There are different kinds. For example, two of the more important and quite common plastics are PET and PVC. PET, with the unpronounceable scientific name of polyethylene terephthalate, is a thermoformed plastic, so it is formed when heated and keeps its form when cooled down. And it's mostly around us in the form of drinking bottles, food containers. It's pretty much resistant to the other elements, and it's, of course, not dissolving in water, for example. That would be a bit unhandy for a drinking bottle. It is resistant to UV rays. This means that PET bottles that are just tossed somewhere don't just degrade and become compost. PVC, on the other hand, polyvinyl chloride, is a rigid and resistant to harsh impact substance, which can withstand extreme temperatures as well. Cables, roofing materials, flooring, pipes can be made of PVC. But it is not resistant to UV rays, so eventually with time, PVC can break down. Besides the traditional kinds of plastic, there are also newer types of plastic that are being developed. The common kinds of plastic are mostly derived from petroleum or natural gas and are thus fossil fuel plastics. The bioplastics are synthesized, for example, from sugars or starch, but also from straw or sawdust. What is a common misunderstanding is that bioplastics are generally degrading really well. This is not true. It depends on the molecular structure of the bioplastic whether or not it will degrade well or at all. And actually, this is why bioplastics have to be recycled in the same manner as common plastics. So not every bioplastic is biodegradable. On the contrary, there are even some petroleum-based plastics which are biodegradable, whilst some bioplastics are not. Biodegradable plastics are often used, for example, for food containers. The issue is that those plastics need to be put into the right kind of waste system to be able to degrade properly. If they are just thrown into landfills, they cannot degrade well or at all and worsen the waste issue we already have. So well-designed and well-managed waste systems are a must to be able to reap the benefits of those biodegradable plastics. Also, sometimes the plastics are considered biodegradable, whilst all they do is break down into microplastics, which then persist in the environment, which is, not what we actually want. Aside from the really obvious uses of plastic around us, there's also plastic of a more hidden sort, plastic that is right in front of our eyes, yet we do not see it, and often we are not aware of it. Those are just a few examples where it is actually rather surprising that plastic is included. In crayons, for example, there can be plastic coating to make sure the colorful inside doesn't break easily. In washing powder, there can be microplastics. The only way to be sure that there are none is if you make it yourself. Party glitter, the stuff we throw around that sparkles so nicely, plastic. In cigarette butts, there's plastic. In coffee filters to make them less easy to tear apart. Even in our toothpastes and in our food. There is even a food safety guideline that says how many milligrams of plastic can be transferred from the packaging into the food. So yes, we eat this then, and it is still considered alright. Pretty mind-blowing, right? The terms micro and nanoplastics are used for very small plastic particles. Some microplastics, like those in the toothpaste, are produced, so they are from the beginning meant to be microplastics. Some microplastics occur because the plastic degrades, so they are essentially the leftovers when plastic breaks down. Both kinds are harmful for the environment because they do not degrade anymore really, and they need hundreds of years for it. In Germany alone, around 330,000 tons of plastic particles under 5 millimeters are released yearly into the environment. If you are drinking your water exclusively out of bottled plastic sources, you are drinking an extra 90,000 microparticles per year. The cycle continues. The factories that produce plastic are a problem in themselves because they can lead to air and water pollution in the area. More than 100 concerning chemicals in the air pollution from petrochemical plants, including carcinogens, are known. In the neighboring communities, people are often faced with serious health issues. Of course, those factories are also monitored and have to fulfill certain standards, and they are surely doing their best to decrease the impact on the environment, but it is undoubtedly still there. What is also concerning is the end of the cycle. Plastic often ends up just dumped somewhere. Even in remote locations nowadays, trash can be found. This happens because people litter, but also because the waste management often fails. We all know by now about recycling and that there are a lot of people who put a lot of effort into sorting their trash to make sure that everything goes where it should. But what actually happens with the plastic that is put in the trash for recycling? Is it really being recycled? Actually, no. Collecting sorted trash is one thing, really recycling is another. Germany is always praised as a recycling heaven, but also in Germany only around 40% are effectively recycled. A lot of the trash that is in the yellow bin is being burned and used to generate heat. In Spain, only around 18% of the plastic waste are effectively recycled. In the USA, the numbers of plastic recycling dropped to around 6% in 2020-2021. What is going on with these numbers, right? What is a big problem for the recycling is that sometimes items do not consist only of one type of plastic, but many different kinds of plastic. So how to recycle them is much more challenging and often ends up not being done at all. What is leading to the drop of the recycling numbers, for example, in the USA, is that a lot of countries like China, that before imported a lot of plastic waste from other countries as well, now are saying no more. They drastically decreased their import of trash, and now the other countries are actually stuck with their own trash. What we all have to learn is that exporting the problem does not equal solving the problem. Just because you close your eyes does not mean that it becomes night. Just because your trash magically disappears does not mean it is really gone. We live in a globalized world, like I said before, with global problems. What we see more and more is how troublesome it is to actually get rid of the plastic we produce. With all these piles of trash, the need for solution becomes more and more urgent. But until now, a lot of the plastic just gets burned or ends up in landfills, and all too often it ends up in the water. In some countries, the plastic is being shredded, so the obvious problem disappears, but there are loads of microplastics being blown around by the wind, covering the environment and the water sources. The plastic pollution in our aquatic ecosystems has reached drastic levels. What upstream starts as freshwater pollution, meaning plastic waste in our streams and rivers, ends downstream as marine pollution. Of course, there is also a lot of trash that is being thrown directly into the ocean. There are literally truckloads of waste just being dumped in the ocean. In ecology, we have this saying which goes, the solution to pollution is dilution. So basically, if you have a pollution and dilute it enough, for example, by water running down the river, sometime later and a bit further down from the pollution site, you might not detect the pollutant anymore. This is, of course, not something to live by. And if the pollution is very pronounced, of course, there's a lot of water needed to dilute this. And with plastic waste, this is not so easy at all. What is thrown into the river will just be washed downstream and ends up hanging somewhere along the course of the stream or end up finally in the ocean. Plastic can serve as a secondary substrate. We say secondary substrate because plastic is not usually something that animals would grow on, but they can actually use it as a substrate to attach themselves to. For example, mussels that usually grow on something, well, they can also colonize the plastic that is floating around. And since there is so much of it already, there's more and more animals that actually use this as a new habitat for them, so a new space to live. In the time when I was living and working in Croatia, I pulled out an old fishing net of the ocean with my students. And then we had the dilemma that there were mussels that lived on it. So what to do? Throw it back or throw it out and kill the mussels? Hard choice. There are quite a lot of organisms that can colonize this floating plastic. There's so much of it by now that there's even a specific term for it, the plastisphere, which contains microbes that exclusively exist on the floating plastic in our oceans. So basically, the plastic is like a completely new ecological habitat. But what is more Well, shocking is what plastic does to wildlife, and I will spare you the gruesome pictures of turtles, fishes, seabirds, or seals that are dying in the most cruel ways from getting entangled in plastic nets or from eating lots and lots of plastic. So we just have pictures of very happy animals here: sea turtles, seabirds, and seals. Animals sometimes confuse the plastic swimming around in the ocean with food. Sometimes they eat it by accident when wanting to actually eat something else. Also, often plastic nets floating around are just something that animals cannot recognize as a danger and evade successfully, so they end up entangled. And if nobody helps them out of those nets, they cannot free themselves anymore. There are quite a few documentaries and a lot of information out there about the bad effects of plastic on wildlife if you want to learn more about it. We talked before about microplastics, and there's still always this question whether this is not really harmful for humans. And it's not so clear yet. But microplastics can be so small that they can become airborne, so basically we breathe them in. If they are in the animals we eat, especially in the animals that we eat as a whole, like mussels, we eat the microplastics they contain too. Microplastics have also been found in other food resources and drinks, so they are essentially by now all around us. Until now, there's not a lot of knowledge on the actual extent of the impact of microplastics on our health. What is known is that they certainly contain a lot of chemicals that are not labeled as safe for food packaging or consumption. There have been many ideas on how to tackle the plastic waste problem. For example, skimming of the ocean surface with robots, so basically collecting the drifting trash from the ocean surface. Spill tech, for example, is a Norwegian technology being used in Scandinavia and the UK to collect trash in harbors. Fishing boats often collect trash by accident anyways, because in their nets they also collect the floating plastic. This can be seen as some kind of help with the plastic problem. However, regarding the magnitude of the problem, this is of course just a drop of water on the hot stove. If you buy something and a plastic bag comes with it, reusing this plastic bag as often as you can is really a good solution. You are already reducing your plastic waste enormously. And if you can't use it as a shopping bag anymore, just use it as a trash bag. A few years ago, Tracy Miner discovered plastic-eating microbes, but until today there are investigations whether those microbes are actually just making our plastic problem go away, or if they themselves are a problem. You can imagine it raises questions like, what happens with those microbes when the plastic is gone? What will they eat then? Or will they just perish? So there's a lot of ideas and possibilities, but there's also a lot of problems with those solutions. One is, of course, like always, money. So who is going to pay for it? And some of the solutions are very energy demanding or fuel demanding. And we all know by now that energy is not for free, and we are having troubles with it already. The robots and machines that are skimming the ocean surface and removing the plastics run on fuel, so that's another issue there. And like I said about the microbes, there are sometimes unknown consequences. Like with those plastic-eating microbes, we don't know what happens afterward, so it can't be applied as a to-go solution. Well, we are now aware that removing the problem after it was created proves to be difficult. So a really valid option seems to be just produce less plastic and produce less plastic waste. There are a lot of initiatives worldwide that tap into this. In France, there is now a law being put in place that forbids plastic packaging of certain kinds of fruit, which will for sure decrease the amount of plastic waste there considerably. Also, there are some nations with bans on plastic bags or countries that in the foreseeable future will change to recyclable bags only. The recycling numbers are being targeted to increase the amount of plastic that is being recycled instead of burned or dumped. And upcycling means that something of low value, like a plastic bottle, is being transformed into something of higher value, like, for example, a sweater or a carpet. There are many ideas, and you yourself also can put some of them in place. For example, if you buy a water bottle from plastic to drink from, and then once you're done drinking from it, you use it as a flower pot or a vase, this is upcycling already. Of course, the question is, what happens concerning microplastics if you put a flower pot from plastic into your garden? The funny thing is that a lot of plastic that is being recycled, especially from PET, ends up as fashion. So the PET ends up in fleece jackets or backpacks. And often new PET bottles that are being produced, their recycled PET is being blended in. So the new bottle is not entirely from new plastic. And there are a lot of initiatives on sustainable packaging, using carton instead of plastic and so on. In Austria, a few years ago in Vienna, it was still standard practice that when you ordered food somewhere, you would end up with a pile of plastic boxes. By now, a lot of those plastic boxes are instead of carton or other materials, and only the lids are plastic. So we have another poll. Do you consider yourselves conscious of the plastic waste issue? It's like, yes, completely, or maybe you have some room for new ideas yet, or not at all. And another question, do you know how to get started when you want to reduce plastic or plastic waste? There we also could say, yeah, I know what to do, or maybe you need ideas. Let us know. Here is a small list of plastic items or items containing plastic that can be easily replaced, and you will end up saving a lot of plastic if you do. For example, coffee-to-go cups that can be used again, reusable grocery bags, drinking bottles that are not single-use plastic bottles. You can replace plastic razors by metal razors with exchangeable blades. You can buy toothbrushes from bamboo. There are Q-tips from paper that will decompose much easier than the plastic ones. Drinking straws can be bought from glass, or if you are a woman and you want to try using a menstruation cup or menstruation panties instead of single-use hygienic products that contain a lot of plastic, you can save quite a lot of plastic by doing this. Of course, nobody is perfect and nobody has to be. And if some of those options just don't work for you, that is fine. The main message here is think about what you could try and do it. If you manage to change to less or no plastic in some parts of life, this is already a big win. We all know that grocery hauls can lead to endless amounts of plastic waste. Everything seems to be packaged or double packaged. So how do we deal with this? How can we do groceries and not produce an endless pile of plastic trash? One option, and this option you always have, is to bring your own grocery bag. You can also take small bags or fruit nets for fruits and vegetables, so you will not have to use small plastic bags to put your food in. Farmers markets are also a good option because there's often the vegetables and fruits that are unpackaged, and you can bring your own bag or basket again. If you share with others, larger amounts of food can be bought and you only produce waste one time. For example, if you buy a really big bag of apples, you can share with your friends or neighbors. And not every single one of you has to buy a small apple bag with its own packaging. There are by now a lot of stores that change the concept to reducing packaging and plastic waste. In those stores, dry goods like noodles and rice are in big glass jars, and you can fill your own glassware with the product, so you don't need to buy it packaged. One big thing is take your trash home. We all learned now that plastic doesn't decompose and is an issue even if it's thrown into the correct bin. It's even worse if you throw plastic just anywhere in nature. If you are outside, bring a little trash bag and take your trash home with you. Leave no trace but footsteps. One thing you can do to reduce your plastic waste is growing your own food as much as possible. If you don't have a garden, there are plenty of herbs or sprouts that can be grown indoors. You do not have to buy a pack of sprouts every other day, and those are always packaged in plastic wrapping. And besides, gardening in any form is a nice hobby and a relaxing way to spend time. If you have a balcony, you can grow even more in pots or in wooden boxes with soil. If you have a garden, there are almost no limits anymore. You can transform a part of your garden into a growing area and benefit from freshly grown vegetables, whilst reducing plastic waste, because you don't have to buy packaged food all the time. What is getting more and more common is to share a field with friends, especially for people in the cities. They can really benefit from those community gardens or fields, and it is a really fun way to spend time. Two big questions you should ask yourself before you buy things are, do I need this? And does it have to be made from plastic? What you buy and what you need are not necessarily always the same. Often we buy things without really thinking about it, and then we use it only once or not even at all. And this is something to avoid. Plastic production is such a big problem, we should aim to decrease it. Instead, it is steadily increasing. Think about the alternatives to the plastic thing you're about to buy. Maybe there are really decent options from wood or some other material that is more sustainable and might last a lot longer. We often tap into this trap of instant satisfaction, like we want to go into the store and buy stuff and we want it now, or we order online and we want it latest tomorrow. Sometimes the more sustainable alternatives might take a little longer to be delivered, but don't let this hold you back from opting for them. If we as consumers change our behavior, we change the market. One of the most important things to think of is be like a hive. Beehives work because bees collaborate. They work together, they share their knowledge, and this is the key to their success. So if you know something, if you learn something new, like today maybe, share it with others. Collaborate. Educate others. Don't tell them what to do with the raised finger, because this never works, but share your wisdom. If you see a nice presentation, talk about it. If you read a really good book, share it. Especially in regards to plastic reduction, it really takes a lot to create new habits, so learning together can be a real treat and a great help on the way to change. The golden approach to this difficult topic and other environmental challenges we are facing is the 3C rule: compassionate, curious, and conscious. Be compassionate. Don't say, I don't care all the time. I know this is something we do to shield ourselves from very difficult topics, but frankly, you should care about plastic waste and plastic reduction and how to make your life a little more sustainable. It concerns us all. Also, let yourself feel for other people and for animals, for example. Think about the animals that are dying from the waste we produce. Let's not continue this in our future. Be curious. Challenges like plastic reduction are constantly evolving. Stay curious, learn something new every day. We cannot tackle tomorrow's problems with yesterday's solutions, so we should always aim to stay informed and ask a lot of questions. The last of the 3 C's is conscious. Be conscious. If you make choices, do not make them blindly. If you buy something made from plastic, okay, but make sure you considered all the other alternatives. If in the end you still come up with the answer that this is what you have to get, well, fine. But more often than not, it will be possible to make a conscious choice not to choose plastic. Last but not least, be kind with yourself and others. If you start reducing plastic, you will see how hard it is. You will try making conscious choices, and the more you learn, the more you stumble upon microplastics everywhere. You end up with plastic bags in the grocery store, and if you start beating yourself up about it, you probably won't stick with these new habits. Nobody likes to hear that they are not doing enough all the time. The same goes for other people. If you see someone try and fail, do not rub it in. If someone tries to create new habits by using less plastic bottles, for example, celebrate them just as much as you should celebrate yourself. If, for example, for a whole week you buy your coffee to go in a reusable cup, and then one morning you end up buying a disposable cup because you forgot your cup at home, don't dwell on the one time you failed. Celebrate all the other days where you managed to live your new habit. There is no need for perfection. We should all try to do our best, and doing our best can look different from day to day and from person to person. With this, I thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it. And you maybe heard a few things that you didn't know before, or maybe you knew them and you had forgotten about them.
Thank you so much, Lena, again for this presentation. It was super, super interesting. And it was also super nice that you were so positive about it, because the topic can get very heavy and depressing at times and you feel like you want to give up. So it was really great to hear a more positive perspective from that. And yeah, thanks again for stopping by. Thank you to you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye.
Ciao.